Well, hello and good day, everybody. Hey, Justin, how are you today?
Dr. Laura, very good to see you. Good to see everybody here. I hope you're excited for another webinar to talk about what we eat and why we eat it.
Absolutely. And that is exactly, what has been going on. That's been a question that I have heard a lot about lately from clients. It's like, just what diet should I be having? Should I be eating keto? Should I be eating vegetarian? Should I, all of these different diets? And, we thought this is something we really need to dive into more. And we really need to discuss the myth busting of all of these different diets and what people would consider the optimal diet. And so, one of the things for our audience, to give you a little sneak peek of what we are going to be covering tonight, is really getting into challenging that idea that there is one universal optimal diet. And, with all these influencers, oh, you have to eat this kind of way. This is the best kind of diet. Look what it's done for me, et cetera, et cetera. And it's what Justin and I are going to do, and Justin, in the wonderful ways that he explains things. And really, I think that diets are such a strong point in your practice. We're going to start unpacking these, especially common fads from keto to carnivore to DNA-based diets, really exploring them and highlighting what I would think genetic misinterpretations, and to show what science really states, at least at this point in time, for what we have available to us. And through that interpretation, using real genetic examples. So some of the ones like FTOG, ApoE, throughout some others that we're going to talk about.
NC4R, let's see, ApoA2, AMY1, TCF7L2. I love the alphabet soup that we have to throw at you guys every night because alphabet soup is in and of itself one of my favorite sources of nutrition that I cannot have based on my genetics. I shouldn't be having. This is a really important topic for a reason, right? Because like name one thing that influences endocrine function, HPA axis function, liver function, gut microbiome status, mitochondria, gallbladder. It just goes on and on. I mean, if you think about the way that each and every cell in the body metabolizes things and has a metabolism, well, our baseline metabolic tendencies that are encoded by our genes are, of course, going to be a significant guider. Is that a word, guider? For how we should be actually, implementing our own diets. I think that there's no topic that is of more relevance because everything eats, and most of us eat every day, maybe more than once a day, hopefully more than once a day for most of us. So these are all epigenetic informative inputs that we have control of. And if we're doing it wrong, I'm telling you, if you're eating out of concordance with your genetics, just because somebody who has totally different genetics than you said that this is the ideal diet, I think you're amiss. And I think that this even has implications for potentially disease states, right? I mean, nutrition can absolutely help, prevent disease states. It can also encourage disease states if you do it wrong. Baseline metabolism counts for so much.
Oh, absolutely. And so, really, what we plan on having you get out of this webinar is we want you to be able to recognize those myths, at least some of them, that we're going to be highlighting, and the realities around optimal diets. We want you to truly start to understand where genetics can and cannot guide dietary choices, but also understanding the role, I mean, the really significant role of lifestyle, behavior, and environment, and how those things shape dietary outcomes, as well as exploring really those actionable, evidence-based dietary strategies that really that are grounded in science. Because honestly, it's like you can have all this theoretical information, or the scientific information, the genetics, but what do you do with it? So, and we're definitely going to be giving you some ideas. So before we start jumping into all of that, we have a poll that we asked everybody to fill out. And actually, I see that Diane had a comment that she said she's been told many times that the Mediterranean diet is best for her genetics, but it wasn't among the poll question choices, which is, there's a kind of a reason for that. Because remember that we are looking at myth busting, and we're going to be diving a little bit more into fad type diets, or diets that are a little bit more extreme. So this is something that we're going to talk about, but yes, we will be sneaking in information about the Mediterranean diet. So Justin, I would love to hand you the honor to go through the poll questions, please, and thank you.
Let's do it, and an honor it is. Okay, so we asked a handful of questions here. The first one was, when you hear optimal diet, I'm using air quotes if you're only listening to this, what comes to mind first? And most of you said long-term health. I couldn't answer that better myself. I mean, a small percentage said, disease prevention, weight loss. 10% said energy and performance. I think that all of these things are sort of part of the same subject that is long-term health, right? Because we love to differentiate lifespan and health span. So yeah, having great body composition, having disease prevention, and high quality energy is of course part of long-term health. So most of you had a fantastic answer, and frankly, all of you did, because it's all one thing. Question number 2, have you ever tried a popular diet trend? If so, which one? A lot of you, almost half of you, are doing intermittent fasting or have done some sort of restricted eating window. Fantastic. Only 3% said carnivore diet. Interesting. I actually expected probably like 20% on that one. Pretty even split between you haven't tried any diet trends, the keto diet, the paleo diet. We'll be diving into a number of these today. Number 3, if you had to choose, which factor do you think has the greatest impact on diet success? Very interesting results here. 43% of you said gut microbiome. 16% said DNA and genetics. Another 16% said environment. And remember, we talk about genes and epigenetics together. So those are sort of one answer. And then 25% said lifestyle, which once again, epigenetics. What are the inputs that are actually making it so that your metabolism is shutting on, shutting off, etc. So number 4, which diet claim have you heard? Carbs are bad, 70% said that. High fat is healthy, 54%. Fasting boosts longevity, 71%. DNA can tell you what to eat, 53%. And 3% said other. Feel free to add to the chat. Maybe we get a chance to discuss it later on tonight. Number 5, the fifth and final one, is what is your top priority when it comes to nutrition? This is an important question. So pretty even split all the way up until you get to supporting longevity and healthy aging. Almost half of you have that goal in mind. So I think that we're all like-minded here on this webinar tonight, Dr. Laura.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, there really is such a big push, I would say, in the last year or two. And that momentum has really been moving forward when it comes to longevity, healthy aging, that it's not just, hey, I want to live a long time, but I want to have an incredible life, health during the years that I have left. And, the nice thing is that encompasses all the other aspects when you really think about it. So yeah, I definitely would say that we've got an audience who is well informed, and we are so glad that you are here to continue to inform yourself. So I see in the chat that one of our frequent visitors, Dirk, said vegan diet for 50 years. Wow. So I wonder, Dirk, if you could let us know, are you saying that you have been on a vegan diet for 50 years? Let us know. I'd really like to know. Oh, he has. Yes. Wow. That's impressive. I got so many questions there, but I know we have to stay focused on what we're going to be talking about. So Uh, actually, I said how Dirk has been a frequent audience member for our webinars, and we love seeing you here. Thank you so much for attending again. But I would really love to know how many people in our audience are new to our webinars. If you can put a 1 in the chat, I would love, if you are new to our ecosystem, to these webinars, please put a 1 in the chat. Wow, look at all of our wonderful people. This is fantastic.
Yeah, welcome.
Wow, guys, welcome, welcome. We truly hope that you will walk away with more information and that the ROI, that return on investment for spending the time with us here tonight, will definitely be worth it and in your favor. Thank you so much for being here. And always, we want to thank those repeat audience members. We truly appreciate you. We are here because of you. So, all right, let's jump in. Let's talk about the different diets that we had listed in our poll. So, talking about the diets and what those main like taglines for them. For example, keto. So there was what like 16% or that have done keto. So the whole thing with keto is fat is the body's best fuel. So for all of you who have done a keto diet, put a K in the chat. I want to see anybody who's done or has been on or is currently on a keto diet. There we go. Wow. Yeah, see, that's a decent amount. So, Justin, let's talk about keto for a moment.
Yeah, there is. So I'd like to introduce kind of what the paradigm shift is as I see it, right? Because we talk about healthy food versus unhealthy food and tracking calories and these sorts of things. And I think that the real shift that we're trying to talk about here is that the ultimate effect of a certain type of food or nutrient on the body is not dependent on the intrinsic characteristics of the food itself necessarily, right? The variable is the person. It has to be the person because I've seen plenty of people go on ketogenic diets and have fantastic results. That's the truth. I've
Right.
seen people go on ketogenic diets and it worked for like a little bit, but then over the long term, sarcopenia can happen. I've seen people get weight gain on ketogenic diets, fully restricting carbohydrates and proteins, right? So I like to look at it like, okay, here's this food. This food is information. When we take in this information, our body is going to process this information and do X with it. If we
Mhm.
were to give our body an abundance of the wrong information, input that it doesn't know how to metabolize and utilize to our favor, then we are in fact creating metabolic consequences by taking in large amounts of that information. It's not the right information for you. Somebody else's genetics that might be the perfect information for their cells, their hormones, their mitochondria, etc. I think that keto, for the most part, I view it as more of a tool for creating metabolic flexibility. I think it can work pretty well for that. But we can look pretty deep into the genes and have an understanding that if this person does not digest fatty acids, lipids, particularly well, and we now make it 80% of their caloric input, how can we not be creating disaster at some point? Right. And that's the thing.
Right.
There's also other issues as far as like long-term protein restriction. To do keto properly, you're really restricting not just carbohydrates but also protein, because there's these gluconeogenic pathways that exist in the body where the body will in fact derive glucose from protein. So to do keto properly, you've actually got to suppress protein to a certain extent as well. To me, there's a homeostatic thing going on in the body all the time. The body wants to break down, the body wants to build up. And believe it or not, food is one of those main things that the body uses to do that. If we suppress protein intake for a certain amount of time, you're also suppressing a pathway called mTOR, right? mTOR is like this building pathway in the body. The long-term suppression of mTOR will absolutely lead to things like sarcopenia, which is one of those sneaky things that actually really reduces healthy aging in a lot of people. It's a bigger problem than we want to talk about. So keto can have some benefits, but if it's not in alignment with what you're trying to accomplish, or if you try to do it for too long without your genes really reinforcing the idea, then you can run into a lot of issues. And I've seen it clinically over and over again. How about you?
Oh, absolutely. Or people getting that keto flu and just not feeling well. And it's just like, again, you were saying, excuse me, they may have some benefits early on, but then things start to go downhill. And this is where we really have to look at the genes, how genes can influence that particular type of diet. So, looking at the ApoE gene. So for ApoE4 carriers, they often can see worsened cholesterol on high fat diets. And obviously, keto can, may increase that risk. Another gene that you look at, by the way, these genes that I'm talking about, you can find in your diet and nutrition report. So if you have your DNA 360, whether you got your laptop in front of you or if you're on your phone or whatever, bring that up and you can actually take a look and see what genes you have and what variants you have. If you have not gotten your DNA 360, I encourage you to do so. And you can actually, refer to that as we go through these webinars, because we're always going to be bringing up genes from those reports and giving you insights into them based on the topic that we are talking about. So getting back to other genes, ApoA2. So this gene, actually the GG genotype, okay, which is suboptimal, that genotype has been linked with higher body mass index, BMI, when saturated fat intake is high. So, again, we want to look to see, is a keto diet something that you could thrive on, for a short period of time or a moderate period of time? Another gene, FTO, the fat mass and obesity gene. So the risk allele on that is an A allele, and that can actually increase your obesity risk. But granted, regular exercise can help to neutralize the effect, but it is something you want to take into account. Be informed of what your genes are and what your predisposition may be, but then shifting and putting them into context for whatever it is that you are looking at. So do you have any bottom line takeaway when it comes to keto or a high fat diet?
Yeah, so this is something that another note is you can improve your ability to metabolize fats as well if you do it right. I mean, I think that a really good goal is metabolic flexibility. We've got a blueprint and we don't want to stray from it too far. However, we don't want our body to like react when we do take in some fatty acids as well, right? So you can utilize things like L-carnitine, L-lipase, doing your workouts and having some fat prior to that. I mean, there's a lot of little kind of low hanging strategies that I'll implement to improve someone's capacity to metabolize whatever macronutrient they want to be metabolizing. Genes are an interesting thing because, a lot of people, they use ancestry and different things and they try to sort of see where their lineage is from. What makes it difficult is that a lot of people have mixed bags of lineage, right? I mean, you can have ancestors going back way, way back to the Australopithecus days. Well, ancestry is not really going to tell you what that level of ancestry is. And our ancestors, I mean, if someone was living in the mountains of Mongolia, their diet versus someone living in the desert would have been drastically different. Or, on the ocean in Greece versus the Arctic tundra, right? There's all of these are ancestral diets, but the reason why we use a code in GG and CT, et cetera, is because there's an amazing trickle down effect that happens from all of your lineage, and you land with this particular code, right? So you don't have to do all that work of trying to figure out who your quadruple great grandfather is and say, well, he ate steak and just that. So that means that I can eat steak and just that. Testing the genes is a more reliable way because you can see what you actually landed with, right? We've got maternal and paternal copies. Things come together and this is how we land. And this is just how your metabolism works now. right? So it really simplifies the process to dial it down and say, okay, I don't have ideal fat processing genetics based on ApoA2, ApoE, etc. And therefore, I don't have to go and try a ketogenic diet because Jenny down the block had that and it worked great for her, right? You can see right on paper, this is what's going to be ideal for me. So the genes are reliable. You can use them. The only thing that they don't tell you everything about would be your gut. And that's why we recommend doing some sort of gut mapping as well. Like we use our Gut 360 Premium, which I believe there is, in fact, a discount code on that we carried over from last week. It's Gut 10. So if you guys want to have a look at what's in your microbiome as well, that would be the other side of it. But keto is not for everybody, and you need to know it. And your genes are a great indicator there.
Right. And just to know, to let everybody know, if you're not watching the chat, that the Gut 360 Premium 10% off discount, for as popular as people asked for it, we are only offering this discount for 48 more hours. So definitely take advantage of it now. All right. Now, you're talking about that steak. Let's jump over to the carnivore diet. So, the claim of the carnivore diet: meat rules. It is the most natural and optimal diet. Now, I want to say one thing before I hand this over to you to speak into it a little bit more, is that when it comes to meat, first of all, living in the world that we have today, not all meat is equal. And the other thing is that there are so many variations of the carnivore diet, because you can have like clean carnivore, dirty carnivore, and all of this other stuff that these are very different diets, even though they fall under that umbrella of the carnivore diet, really, leaning in on that protein. So, Justin, I'm going to hand this over to you to speak into the carnivore diet a little bit more.
Carnivore diet's very interesting because it is one of those ancestral diets once again, right? And again, any ancestral diet, it qualifies as an ancestral diet, but it doesn't mean it's ideal for everybody. Now, there is clearly people that go on a carnivore diet and absolutely thrive. I mean, I would say Dr. Sean Baker is a fantastic example of that. The man's 6'5", 270 pounds of muscle, and he's a world champion rower. And he was also a surgeon of some kind as well in the military. So you're talking about someone who's performing on a very high level and has for a long time. And he's as strict as it gets, right? Steak, eggs, occasional seafood, but he doesn't dabble in any carbohydrates, fully taking advantage of the gluconeogenic pathways to get any glucose requirements that he has. Now, what I will say is I don't know Sean Baker's genes, Dr. Sean Baker, sorry, but I can assume that because of the success he's had, his genes likely line up very well to that diet that he's on. If you were to zoom out on his lineage, and it turns out that thousands of generations of where he lived were among the Mayan Empire, where they were eating tubers and they had 2,000 different species of potatoes, and like most of their calories were coming from carbohydrates, I would say that it's likely he wouldn't have the trickle down effect of that genetic enzyme activity to be able to process large amounts of animal foods and nothing else. Why would he, right? That's how this all works. If he's got ideal genetics to do that, then by all means do it. And same with you folks. If you do and you do, and I've seen great healing take place on the carnivore diet. I do think that there's some very useful aspects of it as far as an elimination diet, right? Some people are very reactive to these different plant foods. It can trigger autoimmunity, these different compounds that exist, lectins, etc. So for some people, yeah, I would say carnivore can work as like a short-term strategy. You're eating a lot of glutamine-heavy foods that can help to repair the gut wall if you have leaky gut. But remember that you're restricting the intake of anything that's going to give you alpha diversity in the gut, right? A lot of these different plant compounds and polyphenols and things are actually increasing the microbiome's diversity, which has anti-inflammatory effects and improves your ability to metabolize different nutrients as well. So where I'm hesitant to recommend carnivore is that I think that when you dial it all the way down to one food group, ultimately you're going to be missing a few things unless your microbiome and your genes totally line up to that. I've dabbled in carnivore. I do enjoy meat, full disclosure, but I found it to be boring, restrictive, and ultimately I did have some electrolyte issues and things like that going on with it. So again, if you don't process fat very well, but you process starch extremely well based on a gene called AMY1, then it's very likely that the carnivore diet is not going to be the best energy producing substrate for you either.
Yeah, and I mean, when you consider, first of all, I gotta say this, one of my brothers is been carnivore for, oh gosh, probably a couple few years now. And one of the things he says is that plants, they're all trying to kill you. That's one of his phrases that he uses, saying that, why he's doing the carnivore diet for as long as he has. And he also is heavy on the fats, obviously saturated fats, because a lot of the meats, saturated fats, but he'll slather butter. Like, I mean, we're talking like maybe half a stick. So very high fat, very obviously protein meat forward. But some of the things that we have to be mindful of when it comes to our genetics and the carnivore diet is you want to look at similar genes that I had mentioned for the keto diet, the ApoE and the ApoA2, because high saturated fats diets can actually amplify those cardiovascular risks. So depending on what alleles you have, okay, which I had mentioned, if you're an ApoE4 carrier or if you have a GG genotype for the ApoA2, you've got to be careful about the amount of saturated fats that you're taking in. Also, like you were saying about there can be some weight gain in there as well. Yeah, I've had clients that will go on it therapeutically for just a few months. And that really has brought down inflammation markers. They started feeling better, kind of resetting the gut some, and then slowly adding back in certain vegetables, honey, different types of things like that. But another gene that to be aware of with the carnivore diet is the TCF7L2 gene. So this really works with insulin sensitivity. The T alleles, which are more suboptimal, those are linked to increased type 2 diabetes risk. And carnivore diets may worsen that glycemic control in carriers. But I will say, because there's almost this dichotomic effect in it, because blood sugar spikes are minimized in a carnivore diet, which may actually help bypass that genetic weakness in that carbohydrate processing. However, long-term, very low carb intake may increase reliance on fat and protein metabolism. So monitoring lipids, liver function, nutrient diversity is very important. So, you want to have your body to be metabolically flexible, to be able to burn fat for fuel as easily as it does sugar, glucose for fuel. So that way it can adjust for whatever happens. And this really works into our ancestors. It's like they didn't have a grocery store to go buy these cuts of meats and to have everything. They had to hunt for it. They're the ones who were their own butchers, but sometimes they'd go days without having meat. So our genetics haven't changed to catch up to our technologies and food availabilities for year-round food. Another aspect that I want to make mention when it comes to the carnivore diet, obviously little to absolutely no vegetables, foliage, greens. Okay. So what does this remind us of? The methylation pathway. So if someone has issues in their MTHFR and all the other suite of genes that we talk about in our methylation pathway, which you will find in the the anti-inflammation reports, if someone has reduced folate metabolism, carnivore diets, which is very low in folate intake, could be especially risky. So, and when we also have to understand that there's no strong evidence that it could worsen risk in those cardiometabolic variants, but it's something to be aware of. So, science is still trying to catch up.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple quick points as well to make while we're on the topic because so I'm a huge fan of food sensitivity testing, right? I talk about it a lot on these webinars. And really, if you look at a carnivore diet, it's almost an extension of like an autoimmune paleo diet, right? Like we've got the paleo diet, which in and of itself, I mean, you can do higher or lower carb paleo, right? There's a lot of variability to that diet. But an autoimmune paleo diet is the same thing, but really cutting out a lot of these known reactors, right? Things like dairy and nightshades and what have you. So, what I'm a big fan of is actually looking at what your food sensitivity list actually currently looks like, right? Because any diet that we mentioned tonight, you can plug it through that filter of food sensitivities, and maybe you don't have to go all the way down to just steak and eggs to eliminate all plants to figure out which ones are actually reactive and which ones aren't. I'm reminded of there's a gentleman named I think Cameron George, and he's actually a kava expert. Like he owns True Kava, and he made a really good point. I remember he was interviewed, and someone brought up like, "Hey, what about plant toxins?" You know, this conversation about carnivore diet and plant toxins, and I won't forget what he said. He said, "Some plants are ready to interface with us, and some of them aren't." Right. So, like your brother's point of all plants are trying to kill us. I don't think it's quite that serious. I think that some of them are trying to kill us, right? And I think that some of them are actually there to be quite useful. So, you know, your point about folate metabolism, et cetera. I mean, plants certainly have some intrinsic value there when it comes to the nutrients inside. But if they've also got anti-nutrients or if they've also got compounds that are causing an immune response within our guts, those aren't good plants for you. Those are plants that are in fact going to try and kill you. So to me, it's like some plants we're ready to have a relationship with, and some plants, it's just like you meet someone and you're just like, for whatever reason, I just don't like that person. Like, get that dude away from me. It's, you know, I can't stand his presence. It's like that with plants, you know, a CBD or something like that. Like most people have this endocannabinoid system that really goes well with it. Some people take CBD or THC and they get a massive anxiety response, and it's just not for them, right? So try to be a little bit nuanced when we talk about plants. I don't like good versus evil conversations, right? Once again, bio individuality is exactly what we're talking about. The person is the variable, not the food.
Beautifully stated. I like that. And speaking of plants, what a great segue into plant-based diets. Vegan. Okay. Hey, Dirk, you are our proponent for this one. And obviously it seems to be working well for you if you've been on it for 50 years. So the claim for these plant-based diets are that it promotes health and longevity and, all of these other wonderful things. I mean, this is not a new fad or anything. But it is a little bit more extreme. I actually did go vegan for not quite 2 years. My body was not super happy with that. So, and I'm not saying that don't do it. Obviously, someone is, doing quite well on it for, you know, I won't say more decades that I've been alive because I have been alive longer than that. But anyway, but things that we need to be mindful of when we are talking about plant-based vegan diets, as far as genetics goes. MTHFR, the methylation pathway. Yes, very important, because people who have dysregulation in their methylation pathway, who are on plant-based or plant-forward diets, vegan, they may need more folate and B12 supplementation because they're not getting it. We usually, I mean, granted, folate, yes, you can get from dark leafy greens and things like that, but B12 in particular, they're not going to be getting enough. B12 is so essential, really giving us energy. We need it for DNA synthesis, red blood cell production, all of these things. And Actually, that is one of the main reasons why I did not do well on a vegan diet, because my methylation pathway, it sucks. It really does. So, I like having my meat. So, and having that protein, and I do better on it. Another gene that we need to consider is the BCMO1 gene, beta carotene monooxygenase. This is what takes vitamin A from vegetables and converts it into the form we can actually use, which is retinol. Okay. Well, if you do not convert beta carotene into retinol very well, where do you think you're going to be getting that? If you're only having vegetables, this is an issue. So again, knowing if you have that problem, then you're probably going to have to take supplementation or change your diet. Okay. Another one would be the SLC23A1 gene. This deals with vitamin C transport. So, granted, on vegan diets, vegetarian, yes, they can get certain vegetables. You can get vitamin C from things like peppers and citrus and other things. But if there's any deficiency, if you have issues with that, then you really need to make sure that you are taking in foods that give you more of that, or supplementation. But if you don't know, then you could be having other issues, especially when it comes to the fact that vitamin C is a great antioxidant. It can help deal with some of the toxins that plants have that we were just talking about. We need to support our bodies in that way. So, Justin, what comments or things have you noticed that you want to share when it comes to plant forward diets?
I think that another interesting nuance here is actually in the glutathione pathway as well. We test for three different genes there, and the one GSTM1 that's associated with gut detox. And we found that if you have two copies, because we measure it as a copy number variation, so two copies on paper and even in your reports, this is a bit of a practitioner insider scoop I'm giving you guys here. If you have two copies of GSTM1, we have found clinically that there's a greater likelihood of autoimmunity, right? Because it can contribute to things like leaky gut. And someone who has leaky gut, I have found that food sensitivities go through the roof, right? I mean, food sensitivities are really more a result of the terrain than the gut just inherently, right? So if you have bad terrain, let's say you have a weakened or compromised mucosal barrier, it's more likely that you're going to have a longer list of food sensitivities, right? Like you're going to react to all these different things, and they usually are plant foods. So if you have two copies of GSTM1 and you choose to go on a really plant heavy diet or even full on vegan, you're going to want to be aware of things like lectins, right? I think that plant-based diets can work, especially if you orchestrate the macros properly, because you could theoretically have a higher or lower starch plant-based diet. You could have a higher or lower fat plant-based diet. I think that those energy yielding macronutrients are one thing, but I think protein, right? The protein sources of plants, they tend to be a little bit more reactive and a little bit less bioavailable and complete in the body. So I would be aware of that. I think that a lot of people don't do as well on the extremes of either side. I've seen people do really well on pescatarian diets, right? Where it's like it's plant forward, no doubt about it, but they also incorporate, eggs or fish or whatever it is. And they're
Right.
substituting and getting a little bit of the saturated fats. They're getting some animal based protein in there, which is helping with that amino acid profile. So I think that there's ways to sort of blend even some of these diets together. But I'll say vegan, Dirk, you're the man, because I haven't seen a lot of people last half a century on a really, really plant forward diet like that. But like I say, if you were to go on one of those and then also do a food sensitivity screening, like IgG testing,
Hmm.
then you can at least take your plant-based diet and filter it down to the things that aren't causing immune responses in the gut. That's a great step forward. You're eating mostly plants, but you're eating only the ones that are nourishing your body and not the ones that are causing inflammation for you.
Right. And I would love to know if any of you have ever tried or are currently on a plant forward diet, either vegetarian, vegan. If you have, or if you are, put a V in the chat. I would love to see this. I know I'll see Dirk's name. Put a V in the chat. Beautiful. So if you ever tried it before, or if you are currently doing a vegetarian or vegan diet. There you go. Yeah, actually quite a few of you.
Yeah.
Nice. And sometimes it can be good to play around with it. Now, obviously, when I did my vegan excursion, this was years ago. I did not know my DNA. I didn't have that information, so it was kind of like, oh, this sounds good. I had actually read the books, Forks Over Knives. That's what ended up triggering it for me. That's like, okay, I'm going to do it. But even though I started to not have such great effects, my hair started thinning. I didn't have the kind of energy that I had because I didn't know to supplement with B12. I didn't know to do these things. It would have been very helpful to know my DNA, and I probably wouldn't have double, tripled down and continued to do it for as long as I did. But kudos to all of you to actually venture out and to test these things. Okay, so now let's jump over to not eating. So we are talking about intermittent fasting or time restricted eating. So I would love to see any of you who has done intermittent fasting, is currently doing intermittent fasting, or if, I'm also kind of working fasting in here, put an F in the chat. I'd like to see how many people have fasted. Wow, a lot of people. Fantastic. All right, so let's talk about intermittent fasting. And one of the claims that I know of, have heard when it comes to intermittent fasting is that it's the best way to reset the metabolism. What have you heard, and what is your information when it comes to intermittent fasting or time restricted eating?
So it's a big conversation that I have with people. It's not a do it or don't do it kind of a thing normally, because the way I look at it is we have these homeostatic mechanisms in the body, and we need to provide the body with scarcity signals sometimes. We need to provide it with abundant signals sometimes. And I always say food is information, it's epigenetic input. So eating is epigenetic input, and not eating is epigenetic input, right? And through all of human history, we ate and then we didn't eat. So this is something that is very much built into us. However, what I will say as well is you can absolutely overdo scarcity signaling, and you're going to have all manner of consequences that come alongside that. Cortisol dysregulation, etc., sarcopenia, right? There's a lot of things that can come alongside it. So to me, it's about sort of dabbling in the windows and seeing what your body can tolerate and can't tolerate. There's a lot of different ways that you can hack it as well to introduce it, right? Like using, some bone broth, doing a bone broth fast, doing, people will do the butter coffee as a fasting hack sort of a thing. Mm-hmm. Side note, have you heard of this sugar diet thing? Because technically it's a fast, but if you guys aren't familiar with it, there are people on the earth right now that are as a fast. I mean, they're taking in nothing but sugar, and I'm talking like gummy bears and Kool-Aid and that kind of thing. And they're calling it the sugar diet. It's quite an interesting thing because on the one hand, I see the logic where you are in fact suppressing the mTOR pathway that I mentioned earlier in the call, because you're not taking in any protein, you're taking in pretty much zero fat, and the only macronutrient you are providing your body is glucose, sugar. What I will say is usually glucose metabolizes pretty quickly and easily, but we do need to remember that especially the sources these people are using it is what our ancestors would have considered absolutely poisonous. Curious your thoughts on that whole sugar diet thing, Dr. Laura.
Oh, my head just hurts contemplating that. I mean, I do have to say, before I dive into the science of it and the genetics, that are influencing and how this can be a health risk. Sometimes I wonder if people come up with ideas that are so extreme, contrary, just to be controversial, to say, let's do this and see if it takes off. Because I will tell you, there's no scientific evidence when it comes to saying that this type of fad, this sugar diet, is a good idea. And I will say that it does pose clear health risks, especially in the context of genetics that govern sugar metabolism, insulin response, and other related pathways. When you consider, let's just talk about obesity and weight gain, because one of the things that they claim is that you'll lose weight. Now, I will say that diets high in added sugars increase caloric intake. Now, granted, fats have even more, but we'll set that aside. When we are talking about high sugar, it's still going to be higher caloric intake. That promotes fat storage and weight gain, which in turn elevates risk for heart disease, metabolic syndrome. You're really putting a lot of pressure on insulin to do its work to get the glucose out of the bloodstream and into the cells, in the tissues. And if you've got some issues with like your TCF7L2 gene or the SLC3088, which is the zinc transport that helps make that insulin, and you just are not getting enough, or that you are dysregulated in your insulin response, you're looking for trouble. Not just that, but excess sugar intake leads to hyperglycemia, meaning a lot of sugar, okay? Insulin resistance, which I've already mentioned, and eventual what we call beta cell dysfunction, that's in the pancreas, okay? That accelerates the onset of type 2 diabetes. And when we're in relation to cardiovascular, if you've got issues in your cardiovascular report, more sensitive to toxins, which sugar can be when there is a lot of it, but chronic high sugar diets raise triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, blood pressure, directly increasing heart attack and stroke risk. And this comes from Harvard Health, okay? The liver. Let's talk about what the liver has got to do. The liver's processing these excess sugars like it does alcohol, and that therefore increases the likelihood of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease due to the conversion of sugar to fat. Yeah, sugar turns into fat, guys. If you're not using it, it will. And then, of course, high sugar intake has been linked to increased risks of cognitive decline, dementia, especially with individuals with the genetic susceptibilities like ApoE4. So, please, please, please don't just jump on these bandwagons because, some major influencer is doing it. Maybe it works for them. They could have different genetics. Again, think of the logic of what history and science has said and shown. So again, yeah, I'm not a fan.
We'll see how it plays out, right? I mean, I must say I'm grateful for some of the influencers that are doing the work for us, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, now, especially if they were to actually post blood markers and things like that, it would be curious to see. I feel like if I was ever going to try that, I would at least not do it with the candy and things that are just not recognizable to the body in the
Right.
first place. Because if you're doing it with strawberries and, honey and stuff like that, at least there's going to be some enzymes in there. There's going to be a little bit of fiber to it, some water
Right.
that comes alongside it. And if you were to do it and somehow have, a caloric deficit because you're not taking in any protein or fats, right? And if you were to use real sources and suppress mTOR just for a period of time, maybe somebody will get a good benefit out of it. I'm not willing to be that particular individual, and I don't recommend any of my patients experiment on that realm as well. Most of the extremes land you with an extreme circumstance, right? I mean, that's just the way it goes.
Right.
But back to fasting anyway. I just really wanted to hear you, and I'm
Well,
not
oh,
shocked to hear your
and
opinions on
and
it.
and I want to mention, it's like, look at bears, as far as all of the fruits that ripen during the summer, what are they gorging themselves with to get themselves fat? Because all that fructose is going to turn into fat, like I had already mentioned, because and actually what that ends up doing is it slows down the metabolism, which is necessary for them during hibernation, so they are able to utilize that fat to get them through. Well, there are conserved genes across their species and ours, and that also happens. And I'm sorry, but I'm active during the winter. I don't need the extra fat to hibernate with. So, anyway, okay, go ahead. I would love to hear more on intermittent fasting.
Yes. So, I mean, it's important to differentiate as well. So, time restricted eating and intermittent fasting are also two different things. If you guys haven't seen it, by the way, Dr. Laura and I did a fantastic webinar all about fasting and the different types and genetics as well. So, that was like a full deep dive on that. So, that's on our YouTube channel. But I think fasting represents a very valuable tool for a lot of people. Like we have genes like brain derived neurotrophic factor. And if you're suboptimal there, fasting actually amplifies that. That's why you get those good feelings and the cognition that comes alongside it. I think that it does work as sort of a little metabolic reset, but I think that you have to do it correctly because if you're already underweight, for example, or you've got sarcopenia, you're not holding on to your muscle mass very well. I don't think fasting is a great call. If you're a 2-a-day athlete, I don't think fasting is a great call, at least not all the time. If you're young, if you're a teenager or a kid, I think that this is a time when you're supposed to be very anabolic and you don't want to tap into this pathway called AMP kinase too severely. I think you want to stimulate that mTOR pathway a little bit more because that's a stage where you're really supposed to be building tissue up, right? So the body's got these amazing built-in mechanisms for feast and famine. And we've got the mTOR mechanism to build things up. And then we've got the AMP kinase pathway, which happens in the absence of any calories. And that cleans up the cells, right? So to me, it's a tool and it's something that you can integrate. However, it's something that I recommend being personalized about. Some people are going to do well on a 16 and 8. Some people are going to do well with the OMAD thing, right? Like one meal a day. For some people, it's alternate day fasting. For some people, they don't do a restricted window at all, but a few times a year, they'll do like a 48, 72-hour fast, and that works great for the growth hormone components. I think there's a lot of gut microbiome benefits to just giving your body a break from yesterday's information before you go piling today's on, right? Like let it work through any old junky proteins or starches that might be sitting around in the digestive tract. Usually, I will use a fasting element as a gut healing protocol for people, among a bunch of other things. But to summarize, I'm definitely a fan of fasting. I just think that it's not a one size fits all thing. It's a whole conversation I have with clients.
Oh, absolutely. And it's educating them on the type of fasts and also looking, where are they, what are their goals, what is necessary, seeing the full picture to then guide what might be the best type of fast to do or easing into it, because it is so varied. Again, it's not just fasting. there's so many nuances to it, but yeah, absolutely can be very beneficial, but it can also be very detrimental in the wrong setting. So, all right, one last thing that we are going to be diving into, and that is DNA and diet, talking about where it helps versus where it doesn't, and misconceptions or thinking, oh, my DNA is going to tell me exactly what I am going to need to eat for the rest of my life. And I want to say that there is no single thing diet. okay, that can tell you, or gene that can tell you the one diet that is perfect for you. Genes influence risk, but in context, not in isolation. And really, the outcomes work together based on what Justin was just saying, microbiome, but also stress of what's going on in your life, sleep, your long-term habits. What is it that you are going to be consistent with? Or, an 80-20 rule, or, 90-10 rule. So it really is a matter of highlighting your unique biological tendencies and nutrient properties, and keeping in context with these insights, with these genes that you have, these functional pathways and the interactions, because it's not, again, just one gene, because they don't exist in a vacuum. It's how they play off of each other, how they influence one another, how that permutation of all the different genes that you have make you you. And really turning that into practical recommendations. So, for example, if we were looking at metabolism cues, okay, we would want to look at your ApoE, the ApoA2, some of the ones that we've already talked about in these different diets. They really reveal how you process fats. They influence your cholesterol. They influence weight management when it comes to fat intake, and more so letting us know about saturated fat intake. The CYP1A2 gene. This helps to determine caffeine clearance, helping to guide safe intake levels when you should be taking it, okay? Or when to make sure that it's not disrupting your sleep. Throw out some others. What are some other genes that you would say that we've either mentioned, and being very specific about how that influences our diet and what we would do?
There's another one called FUT2, which is really interesting because Dr. Laura mentioned B12, right? Super duper important for a lot of stuff, especially the methylation pathway. And for the most part, you're not getting much B12 from plants. You know what I mean? I mean, there's some, I think, spirulina and like some of these sea algae and stuff that'll have a little bit of it in there. But for the most part, you're getting it from eggs, you're getting it from steak. I mean, B12 is so important. And FUT2 is actually interesting because B12 is the only micronutrient that does not get passively absorbed into the gut, right? So if you eat a meal and it's got some vitamin E in there, right? Like maybe you had some walnuts or something that has vitamin E in it, on some level, that vitamin E is going to get into the gut biome and it's going to do its job. B12 is unique. It needs a carrier. It needs like a taxi cab to get it through that gut barrier. Well, that taxi cab is the gene FUT2, fucosyl transferase. So when you have a suboptimal version of that, it means that even eating B12 sources, you may not be getting ideal absorption there. Or supplementing B12 sources, you may not be getting ideal absorption there. So one of the things we do, and we've had whole webinars about methylation, so we won't get too deep here. But if you have suboptimal FUT2, you're going to need more likely a sublingual format of your B12, your cobalamin, or intravenous. But I mean, who wants to drive to a clinic every time they want to take B12? So, sublingual, something that's going to bypass that entire process. The digestive process sometimes has to be superseded and overridden by the way that you do things. So, FUT2 is interesting, and that is in your methylation profile.
Right. And we've already talked about things like the BCMA1 gene for beta carotene monooxygenase, that conversion of the vitamin A, the SLC23A1 for vitamin C absorption. We also have to consider vitamin D. Okay, the vitamin D pathway. How well are you converting? Do you need foods that are higher in vitamin D in the D3 form? At Another thing I want to touch on are the genes for behavior when it comes to your relationship to food and the circadian rhythm. This plays a really important part because it works into intermittent fasting, like that time restricted eating. that can be influenced by the genes, the clock gene or the CRY1 gene, CRY1. These impact circadian rhythm, the response to fasting or meal timing. And like the CRY1, part of that circadian rhythm system, it's really important because it helps when we're talking about the regulation of hormones like leptin and ghrelin. If you are dysregulated, it could cause or increase cravings for late night eating or higher caloric foods, which also works into the MC4R gene. You know, that's a hunger cue and snacking gene. And then the FTO gene, your fat mass and obesity gene. You know, that really dives into how well your gut is telling your brain, I'm full, stop eating. You know, I've said on many webinars, unfortunately, I am dysregulating that. So I have to be really mindful because especially at buffets or, you know, I'm very careful about not just eating out of a bag of chips or a bag of something that's not portion size, because I'll end up eating like the whole thing and then be like, oh my gosh, I feel awful because I've overeaten. You know, so this is something to be aware of, that, you know, doing action items like if you are dysregulated in your FTO gene, portion size, have the portion and just eat that. Eat slowly, giving your time for your gut to tell your brain, I'm full, stop eating. You know, there's a Japanese phrase, hari hachibu, stop eating at 80% full. I know that's not a direct translation, but that's basically what it means. You know, so it's being mindful and aware, not eating mindlessly, like while you're driving or watching TV and just shoving food in your mouth. Chewing, you want to chew slowly, allowing that time for that digestion. So this kind of leads into a study, you know, that when we're talking about genes, and the particular study that we were looking at, it's ApoE4 and the Mediterranean diet. So this is where I was talking about earlier that I was going to mention the Mediterranean diet, because in this study, it found that people with 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene, which is the highest genetic risk for Alzheimer's, eating the Mediterranean diet actually cut their dementia risk by 35% when following that type of diet. And they found that that genes highlight where lifestyle changes matter most. So the ApoE4 carriers weren't doomed. They actually had the most to gain by shifting their diets. Because remember, your genes may load the gun, but it's your lifestyle that pulls the trigger. So before, I know we need to jump into questions because we've got some great questions piling up. When it comes to genes, to things, not just the genes, but the things that influence. Justin, would you please give us a brief overview of things that can influence what we're eating that is not just our genetics?
So, I mean, I love the saying, right, about the genes loading the gun, lifestyle pulling the trigger, because we've got our genetic blueprint, and then we've got the actual like methylation of these genes that are based on the input that we provide for it, right? So, epigenetics is something that is 100% in your control. You're the only one who can screw this up, and you're the only one who can make this work, right? So, it's like Dr. Laura just said that she's got the bad version of the fat and obesity gene. You'll notice that she's not obese, right? So we need to make sure that we understand here that our genes are not our destiny. They're just sort of a guiding principle that we can manipulate based on what we do. When we have inputs, be it the way we exercise, the way we sleep, the way we eat, the way we think, literally, these enter the epigenome and they alter our phenotype, right? Like how we actually show up and manifest into the world. So by gaining control of our actions, our energy, and our thoughts, we can influence our epigenome. And that is basically the way I describe it. It's writing in chalk over top of our blueprint, right? So the genes, what you landed with, you have CT, you have GG. That's the basic blueprint, and that is in fact written in pen. You can't erase pen, but what you can do is you can write over it, right? So the blueprint is there. You can write over it with your input. You can take chalk and you can say, well, I say that my genes express this way. If your cells are reading the blueprint, that is your genes, they can only read the chalk over top of it, right? You can't see the pen underneath of it if you write in chalk. So the genes and these cells are now going to read the chalk that you've written over top of it, and that represents a methylation pattern. You've introduced high quality input over and over and over again, and now your genes have a methylation pattern, and your cells are in fact reading that pattern now, right? That's my kind of analogy for how I talk about epigenetics versus actual genes and genotypes. We need to make sure that we grab that chalk and we write over top of it with the highest quality inputs possible. And the areas where the genes themselves are suboptimal, those are the areas that you've got to press the hardest. You know, like when we used to have to write on chalkboards when we were bad kids, if you wrote the same thing enough times, even if you erased it, you'd still see like the hallmark of it. That's what I'm suggesting you do over those areas where you have suboptimal genes. Grab that chalk, write it real hard, do it enough times that your body will start to recognize the pattern, and ultimately you will manifest a higher quality phenotype because of it.
Beautiful. Love it. All right, let's jump into questions because we've got a bunch and they are good questions. So, our first question is from Michael, and he's asking, does a strict vegan diet increase the risk of neurodegeneration? And I'm going to answer this one. And I want to say that a strict vegan diet does not inherently increase neurodegeneration risk, but it can elevate risk in those who develop specific micronutrient deficiencies, particularly like the ones that I had mentioned earlier and that Justin had mentioned, like B12, omega-3 fatty acids, iron, zinc, those that are more prominent in protein meat forward, or that are in meats that would obviously be missing in a vegan diet. So especially when there is not proper dietary planning and supplementation for those people who are participating in and having a vegan diet as their lifestyle. So yeah, just go in knowing that, I'm sure Dirk is being informed on taking the right supplements and making sure that you are having those nutrients so you don't have any deficiencies or insufficiencies. All right, next question, Ruben. He's asking, how do we determine genetically if we are candidates for intermittent fasting? Justin, you want to answer that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because we don't directly have genes that we look at beyond the satiety signal genes and the TCF7L2 insulin gene. We look at it more for like who is going to benefit from it as a strategy and who should or should not do it. The way I determine if someone should not do it is more based on how they present when they show up, right? Like I'm trying to see, are they underweight? Is there a reason why they shouldn't be giving a break to calories? Because at a baseline, all of us are wired to eat and then not eat, right? I mean, for a very, very long time, we did not have grocery stores. We did not have caloric availability at the snap of a finger or the literal press of a button, right? So I think that our genes are really the trickle down effect from people who had to earn their calories, right? There wasn't just massive availability, and what we got had to be earned. So you had to burn to earn, right? I think that it's more about who shouldn't do it. And I actually look at that based on the presentation of their health status when they show up. Some people tend to get a little bit more of like a cortisol response, right? If they're a more irritable person based on their genes. If you've got optimal BDNF, then that's not necessarily something you have to amplify. If you have optimal TCF7L2, we don't necessarily have to put extra strategies for blood sugar management in there. But that doesn't make it a bad idea either, right? So this is a big conversation that I have, but there is no particular genes I'm pointing at in the DNA 360 to determine such a thing.
Well, yeah, and I definitely appreciate that information. Um, I've been noticing in the chat. I just want to mention to people that I appreciate you sharing your genes, but to just determine based on a handful of genotypes for particular genes, we cannot truly determine the best or optimal diet for you simply because of what we've been talking about. It's way more than just a small handful of genes. It's really looking at what is your lifestyle, what have you been exposed to, what are tendencies, do you have any sensitivities, how is your microbiome, knowing that information can really help to determine what that optimal diet is, and that there's dynamics to that. Like I said, we are dynamic beings. We can't expect our diets, our supplements, and these things to be static. We have seasons. There are different foods that naturally grow during this time period. And also based on your microbiome. What's going on? Do you currently have leaky gut? Do you have a high concentration of a particular pathogenic species, or that you don't have enough of a beneficial species that needs support that would, when fixed, would be able to help you be on a more long-term optimal diet? And if you want to know these things, please check out our Gut 360 premium test. We are currently running a 10% off discount, but only for the next 48 hours. So please take advantage if you want to know what are those buggies in there, what's going on, and what's the terrain look like, to help determine what you should be eating right now, and also long term, because that can obviously give us insights. All right, so next question, and I want to mention for Dirk, because he's asking about Dr. Gundry's MCT wellness powder, excuse me. I personally am not familiar with it, and I am therefore hesitant to make any comments about it, because again, I'm not familiar based on his claims. I don't know if you are, Justin, or if you have any other.
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts on it. So I've seen it, and really, I mean, MCTs. I mean, that's the original ketone that people use. It doesn't have like an unbelievable capacity for raising blood ketones in the same level that like a 1,3-butane diol would. I mean, now there's these esters and things that are really, really strong when it comes to actually raising ketone levels. MCTs was one of the first ones to kind of do that, along with beta hydroxybutyrate. And really, I mean, yeah, the liver takes MCTs and it converts it into ketones, and it will slightly elevate ketones, which is going to have some different benefits. Again, it's not a one size fits all recommendation. I mean, a lot of people have tried to get on MCTs and they immediately have diarrhea and they never go back. Right? There's nothing is one size fits all. With regard to the polyphenols and things in there, personally, I'm a big fan of polyphenol supplementation or usage. It's not necessarily a mandatory thing. But that product, my understanding is, yeah, it's supposed to just sort of boost your ketone levels a little bit and provide your body with some antioxidants. I think it's a perfectly good idea, but as far as like larger claims of what it's going to do with regard to bypassing caloric systems, I don't think that's the case personally. I think that it's an add-on that can be useful, but the only way to get your metabolism right is to have the entirety of your diet be correct for you. Eat the right macronutrient structure, remove food sensitivities, possibly add in a fasting window. And yes, something that's going to boost your ketone production is also going to be useful. But I wouldn't be making any magical claims about a product like that. But Dr. Gundry is the man. Shout out to Dr. Gundry if he sees this.
Thank you for that. So speaking of food sensitivities, we have a question that came in about a company. Do you have a company that you recommend for food sensitivity testing? Is there something, because I know that you've been doing the FDN course, which tests those types of things. So what do you have?
Yeah, so there's two. It depends on location. So where I'm at in Canada, we can't get the Mosaic, or sorry, Mosaic is the one that we can get. The company's called Mosaic Diagnostics. That's also available in the United States. There's also one called Oxford MRT, which is fantastic, but it's not available for Canadians. So those are both testing what's called IgG, right? So there's these different immunoglobulins that get released. It's an immune response. There's IgA, IgG. And really, it's just showing what foods are effectively creating an immune response in your gut and therefore inflammation. And it gives you a big long list, like 190 different foods, and it breaks it down real simple. It's just like red, yellow, green, based on the reactivity scale. And what I usually recommend is a detox protocol where you eat only things in the green category for like 90 days and work on the gut microbiome. And potentially you can reintroduce some of these things. Food sensitivities are, in fact, a moving target, right? It's a dynamic environment because your gut is a dynamic environment. So Mosaic Diagnostics, it's a simple blood spot, right? You prick your finger, you drizzle it on a card, you send it in, and they send you a list of 190 foods that you're reactive to or not. So to me, any diet that we talk about, it could be keto, it could be whatever. I plug it through the filter of food sensitivities because that is an additional stressor on the body that you might not know you have until you look. So that technology is available to us in 2025.
Well, thank you. And I know that you've had, wonderful recent experience learning about that. So I knew you'd have a great answer.
Yeah, very cool stuff.
Yes. All right. So Michael actually had a bit of a twist on an earlier question that he asked about strict vegan diets. But this time he's asking, does it increase the risk of neurodegeneration for an ApoE4 carrier? And the answer is similar. Okay. But when we are talking about a strict vegan diet, okay, yeah, it can increase the risk of neurodegeneration for individuals who have ApoE4, especially if it leads to deficiencies. And there we go again, of things, very vital nutrients like B12, omega 3s, iron, zinc, vitamin D, different aspects like this. So it's again not something that it definitely would, if you are aware of the possible deficiencies and make sure that you are supplementing for that and getting that taken care of. All right. Next question. Actually, I'm going to shoot this one over to you by George. He's asking, what do you think of the blood type diet? And he said, based on over 35 years of a particular doctor and continuing with his son as a doctor also, of observing the success failure of eating certain foods, vegetables versus meat, for example, and the various varieties of such, noting that their blood type and the different results with the same eating of these different foods with certain blood types. I mean, I've heard of the blood type diet. I know for my blood type, it says that I should be a vegetarian. I didn't do so well doing vegetarian. Well, yes, I did vegan, but then I also shifted it into vegetarian. So I have thoughts about that, but I would love to hear your thoughts on the blood type diet.
Yeah, I think any step towards personalization is positive, and I've seen people have pretty good results actually on the blood typing diet. Shout out, there was FDNs in the comments there, so woo, go team FDN as well. And yeah, pairing that with functional genomics is certainly going to be a revolutionary approach. So I'm glad you're along for the ride on that. My FDN mentor is actually a huge fan of blood type dieting. He says that that's given him and his clients tons and tons of good results, and I do think that it's sort of stemming from this ancestral thing that we talk about, right? To me, it's like when we have this plethora of diets to choose from, any step in the right direction towards, there's some evidence that this is going to work better for your biology. I think it's at the very least worth looking at, dabbling in. In FDN, they also do this metabolic typing thing, which I've found a lot of correlatives to the genes as well. My blood type, B positive, it actually correlates pretty well with what my genotype is as well. They say that B positive, you can eat like you're the type that you would want to invite to a picnic because you're not going to be picky. You can actually thrive on either substrate kind of a thing. And my genes suggest the same things. I'm medium for AMY1, which is starch metabolism, and I'm medium for ApoA2, right? So a hybrid diet is where I land, and my blood type actually suggests the same thing. I don't think that the science is as hashed out as genes. I'll say that. I think genes are a little bit more concrete in their recommendations. Dr. Varden's not about to jump on a vegetarian diet and thrive. She tried, didn't work, but her genes do work for her, so I would rely on genes, but I think that there's actually some room for interplay there. Again, I mean, if you're taking any normal diet advice from an influencer, that's a bad idea. But personalizing it via genes, blood, metabolic type, food sensitivities, these are all fantastic steps in the right direction. So I'm not against blood type dieting at all, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, me either. It's just that I think that can influence it. But then looking at genetics, looking at sensitivities, looking at these are all pieces of a puzzle, and then putting them all together, I think just gives more information for a better, even more personalized, optimized diet. So okay, so question from Mickey. Regardless of genes, will high consumption of saturated fats in a long-term keto diet lead to NAFLD or insulin resistance? And, he's talking about dirty keto as well. Now, I'll take this really quick. Yeah, high intake of saturated fats in the long term is linked to an increased risk of NAFLD, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Research has shown that saturated fat promotes more what we call hepatic fat accumulation as compared to unsaturated fat, even at the same calorie level. So, this is something that you want to take in more of the monounsaturated fats, the olive oil, avocados, hot foods that are high in omega-3 fats. These are more protective for the liver. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the quick and dirty of it, that short-term keto, clean, whole food based, can improve metabolic health, but that long-term dirty keto, which is more of the high saturated fats, low micronutrients, low fiber, that does and can raise the risk of the NAFLD, insulin resistance, inflammation. All right. Next, let's see. I want to jump to here's getting into microbiome. And so Lynn is asking, wouldn't the carnivore diet also be a disaster for the microbiome? Fruits, vegetables are so wonderful for the gut biome.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was mentioning about that alpha diversity thing, right? So it's like alpha diversity is obtained by taking in various different sources, right? Like our ancestors would have sort of sought out as many different nutritional sources as they had in the vicinity, of course, right? I mean, you wouldn't be restrictive if you were actually in the woods, right? I mean, we think about like modern society versus our ancestors, they were the modern day equivalent of being lost in the woods, right? And if you were lost in the woods and you found a source of calories, you were probably going to eat it, no matter what, if it was green, red, animal, plant, right? Whatever it is. So when we make a conscious choice to reduce every food group that isn't coming from an animal, I think that, yeah, you can lend yourself to having less prebiotic fiber, having less different sources of these things that are encouraging diversity levels in the gut. Like I said, you've got the Sean Bakers of the world who clearly thrive, and I'm not about to tell them not to, right? It's working so great. But I do think that for a lot of people, long term, you can end up restricting and not having as many different beneficial species as well. Animal based diets can have some gut healing effects, and I think can be useful from that elimination diet perspective. And some people have the genetics to stay on them for a longer term and still have their metabolism work well. But yeah, when it comes to this whole microbiome diversity thing, I think that there's a problem with that level of restriction. And I would rather go on your genes and then run a food sensitivity screening and land on a better list that way.
Yeah, I would agree on that. So Sheila has a couple of questions, and I'm going to kind of group them together here because she's like, I've got all these genetic predispositions, have all of these issues, and it's like, everything's going to make me fat or cause problems. And she's like, holy cow, what do I eat? And, as far as like genetics, how do we determine if someone would thrive on a vegan diet? Well, first of all, for sensitivities, for these things, I definitely would work with someone to hash out if lifestyle is also a factor, if there are toxins on board that might be impacting that, because you might be able to expand what you eat a little bit more than possibly right now. But also a great website that I love if you do have to have a restrictive diet, what the bleep can I eat.com. You can actually go in there, click in a particular restrictive diet, and it will tell you all the foods that you can eat that fits into that, or if there are certain restrictions with different diets. So definitely would take a look at that. And as far as whether a vegan diet, that goes through, again, looking at the genes that we talked about to see where you convert, if you do, what's good. But it's not just about the genes. So there's all of the other aspects that we've already talked about. And for Mickey was talking about really getting down to testing, because even with genes, insulin resistance can even exist without elevated A1C. Absolutely. Testing is really important. Taking a look at all of these markers, along with the genes, along with the lifestyle, along with, all of the different puzzle pieces. Test, don't guess. If A1C is off, or if insulin, I love seeing a fasting insulin as well, putting those pieces together to see what dials need to be turned to help someone in their recovery if they're having an issue, or for optimization. And last but not least, Ellen, I love this question. What about the idea of intuitive eating? I'm going to say something and then I'll give you the last word. Okay, Justin?
You got it.
When it comes to intuitive eating, the one thing that I hesitate about that is when we are talking about the gut biome. If, say, for example, you have high candida, those little buggies are going to be giving your body cues, clues, and metabolites saying, give me more sugar. Give me foods that may not be the healthiest, because they're like, feed me. There's plenty of us, and they're going to be loud. And so our bodies, our brains are going to be going, okay, well, I intuitively want to have these types of foods. That's where my going, oh, intuitive eating might not always be the best thing, but it can be a decent thing if the terrain is working well. So Justin, do you have any last thoughts on intuitive eating?
Yeah, I mean, I think you are your own greatest expert, and I'm a big fan of the concept of intuitive eating. I would say that I, as a practitioner, I'm very hesitant to recommend that across the board, though, because I mean, for example, I've worked with people who have eating disorders, and they have a different voice inside of them that's not necessarily them, that's saying, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat, and they're hugely underweight, right? And they're intuitively eating very, very small amounts of calories and over exercising, etc. But is that intuition, or is there something else coming up? Right. So it's like, I think that the concept is great. And, this is what we do is teach people to fish, right? I mean, we're trying to ultimately, we're not going to be here to hold people's hands forever. I want to teach you about your metabolism in the best case scenario. And then the onus is on the client to actually pull it off all the time. You have to create a circumstance where you trust yourself with that. And I think that that's a bit of a process and can take some work. Ellen, if you're in a place where you're already there and you totally trust yourself to do the right things and boost your longevity that way, power to you. You're the captain of your own ship. As a coach, I have to sort of show people where to look first before we get them to that place normally. So I don't baseline recommend intuitive eating, because I've seen a lot of people end up obese. I've seen a lot of people end up with other metabolic issues, and there's certain things that aren't entirely intuitive either. right? Like the food sensitivities is a great thing. Yeah, there's going to be little physiological indicators, but you don't necessarily have that level of awareness that the asparagus was causing you inflammation and the broccoli was not. But intuitively, I said, I'm going to eat some veggies because it's a good call, right? So testing, having a way of actually tracking, engaging it, and then using your intuition to keep yourself in alignment and on track. There's nothing greater than willpower, right? If you can cultivate that, then you got all the power in heaven and on earth.
Well, I appreciate that input and great questions, everyone. We love them. And we love that you have spent this time with us. Thank you so much. We hope that you are walking away from this webinar informed about different diets, how your genes affect it, and the limitations thereof. So, again, have a wonderful night. Thank you, Justin. You are awesome. I love doing these webinars with you. Have a fantastic night, everyone.
Ditto, Dr. Laura, and thanks everybody for showing up. We will see you on the next one.
All right, let's dance out.
New music.